I would like to introduce today Robert Jackson, Yosemite Clean's Vice President of Business Development and Managing Member. Rob owns and operates Daybreak Farms, an organic farming operation in the Central Valley. Rob has worked the land for decades and knows better than anyone else what biomass owners need and want moving forward. So just kind of to begin, if you wouldn't mind opening up a little bit with your experience in ag and maybe a little bit of family history in the Central Valley.
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. I am Robert Jackson, and so my history goes back. Great great grandfather moved to Kingsburg in like 1906. He's a Swedish immigrant. He was a chicken farmer, and so he that's how he earned his living here in Kingsburg. On my father's side, moved to Kingsburg area in 1934 during the Depression, and my grandfather was a field laborer. After 6 years, him and his brother bought 20 acres of vines, and the rest is history. And so I go back several generations here in this area, and that's I started farming actually in high school. Started renting land, tree fruit, and then grew cotton, vegetables. I began my farming career renting ground. Uh, so I negotiated a purchase from that lease, bought that original lease. Then I bought a property where my parents lived and began farming that in 1988. It's been a good journey. I became a certified organic grower in 2006, I believe. So I was a conventional grower for 2 decades, and so I know both sides of the fence. And frankly, the biggest thing to get through, other than figuring out how to farm tree fruit organically, was just putting up with the stigma of having a lot of weeds, which now is cover crop, and is doing a lot of good for my soil, but in the field. So no longer did I have pristine, weed-free orchards. I now had to deal as an organic farmer with grass everywhere. And I soon realized that winter grass was actually it's the native grass, but it's actually a benefit to the soil. And as we found out recently in the last couple years, and even so now, it's one of the greatest carbon sinks in agriculture worldwide. Healthy grasslands are the best way to sink carbon dioxide out of the air into the soil.
Gotcha. And was there anything specific that pushed you to make that change going from conventional farming to organic?
Frankly, when you're hanging danger, uh, do not enter signs on your fields and doing the spraying yourself, and then you have kids running around the farm, and you're responsible for employees, and you start reading the fine print when you go from field laborer in high school or working in on the farm to now being responsible for people working on the farm. And I just got tired of seeing the risk of death, may cause harm, birth defects, you name it. I had to read the fine print of the labels, and I started realizing I really didn't want other people to be exposed to that, let alone my own employees, let alone my children, let alone myself. So I really started looking right away after farming for maybe 5 years for ways to eliminate conventional pesticides, and it took me about 15 years to be completely certified, but I decided that because of the people factor.
Gotcha. And was there any surprises or things that you didn't necessarily know were going to be a benefit of organic farming, other than what you're talking about with having those natural grasses as carbon sinks? Was there anything in particular that really you were like, wow, this is great. I'm glad I made this decision?
I love farming the way I do, but it's not easy. So we fight diseases and pests with things that are naturally occurring on the earth. Many times those things have very little effect, or their efficacy only lasts for a day or two. And so the difficult side of organic farming is that when regulatory changes happen and they eliminate a product from use and we have no other means, then we can experience incredible damage, uh, or just the diseases that we have to deal with, finding ways to deal with that. But as far as what I love about it is I love the cycle. I love seeing insects as or good insects as my allies. And I love the crickets, the bird sounds. As a farmer, you're much more in tune with nature around you because you're often out in the field checking the fields, and you're just aware of the cyclical nature of our migratory birds. I'm very aware when the robins come through my area on their way through in the November, December, and I'm very aware when they arrive back here at the end of January. So you enjoy the birds when you're working outside. You're much more attuned, I think, to other large migratory birds, and so it's that part of it is fun.
Gosh, yeah, it sounds lovely, almost like a fairy tale. So at its simplest form, if you were to describe it to maybe like the average person, what is the life cycle of an orchard? Do they continue to produce fruit forever? Do you have to replant? If you wouldn't mind just touching on that.
Sure. So an orchard, it depends what kind of trees you're talking about. We really don't know how long pistachios, for instance, will last. Uh, they may last commercially for 70 years, 100 years. We don't know how long commercially these orchards will be viable. But other than a pistachio orchard, walnuts usually around 30 years, I would say. You can get there's several ways that trees or commercial orchards decline in productivity. One, you either shade out your fruit buds, and so you no longer are fruitful, or the trees can become sick and die, or get too big and break. So a peach, plum, nectarine. Peaches and nectarines the tree life cycle is around 20 years. Sometimes farmers will pull their trees earlier because of production, losing production, or maybe a variety change because the market has changed its tastes. The other way is like plums could last a little longer. Like I said, walnuts 30 years, almonds probably 20 years. And there again, it's either because of the soil, the trees become weakened, or they get shaded out, but the fruitfulness goes down, so it loses its economic viability. And so usually farmers pull out their orchards, just talking about almonds and fruit trees, every 20 years. And so we figure that the amount of wood that we actually pull out of the ground averages more than a ton per year per acre of growth. And so on average, it should be maybe even up to a ton and a half. But so a 20-year orchard would produce at least 20 tons of dry wood when you pull that orchard.
And so what options do farmers have right now to do with that wood? Do they burn? Do they chip? What are the most popular options of how to dispose of that or reuse?
Yeah. So historically, we've just piled those trees up. We've pulled them out of the ground, piled them up, and burned them. And so I grew up in the days of burning our wheat fields around here as a kid. It caused a lot of smoke, and in the summer we don't have weather patterns that push our smoke out of our valley. So the air would become, you could see that smoke in June and early July around the valley, and it would harm our air for breathing. It would also harm the aesthetics of clean air. So, but same thing with trees. We would burn them. Although burning trees, you don't see the smoke as you would burning a wheat field. But still, you're burning and you're releasing all that into the air. That's been our normal way that we've handled it, and now that is become regulated so that within 2 years, no one will be able to burn as a general rule their waste wood when the orchard is pulled. So there's a couple options that we have now. We can either chip that wood and put it back in our soil, incorporate it back in our soil, or we can chip it and haul it away for some other use. The pulling, chipping, and hauling costs about $1,000. If you reincorporate, the Air Board is actually incentivizing farmers to reincorporate those chips into the soil. There is a few advantages over the long term of reincorporating the cellulose back into the soil. But before you can get to that state of having an advantage in the soil, that cellulose has to break down. That breaking down process actually creates methane that is released back into the atmosphere as that wood chip is broken down. And so that's the negative side of incorporating your wood back into the soil. In addition to that, that cellulose in the soil becomes a type of nitrogen sink. In other words, to break that cellulose chip down in the soil, it requires excess or extra nitrogen to break that cellulose down. And that costs money. It also, for farmers to add nitrogen to the soil, it also adds the risk to over applying nitrogen in the soil and thus resulting in a excess nitrogen problem, which can leach down into your water reservoir. So those are the two ways. That's where we come in. I actually got involved with Yosemite because we are looking at alternative ways or what to do with our waste wood.
Yeah, and so what are the advantages of what Yosemite Clean Energy is proposing compared to the different ways of disposing wood that you just mentioned, such as chipping and burning?
Well, the first advantage is we're not burning the wood. We're actually transforming the wood from its solid state to its gaseous state, cleaning out the tar. So it's now a clean syngas, which through our process has about a 1/3 the BTU or power strength of regular natural gas in line that you have at your home. So that syngas, then we're taking that syngas and separating it into what we feel is the two highest valued components, which is renewable natural gas and renewable hydrogen. So the advantage to farmers is, one, the cost is going to be there regardless. You're going to push that tree, chip it, and in our case, you're going to haul it. And our goal is for our plants to be owned primarily by the wood contributors. Thus, we can return the highest return per ton for that wood back to the grower or the wood handler. So the advantage on the farm side is that we're actually creating a type of new mineral right, you might say. We're taking our waste wood and turning it into high valuable products that will actually be replacing diesel on our California highways. And so it takes what was $1,000 bill, and then if you reincorporate it, it's more like $1,500 because you're adding nitrogen. And I didn't mention, a lot of farmers are finding if you sink that wood chip down deep into the soil, and it's creating methane. That methane is actually detrimental to any trees that you're going to replant in that soil. So there's a lot of disadvantages, not only for our environment to reincorporate the chips in the soil, but it's also a disadvantage to replanting trees. So the advantage is we're creating a new source of cash, a new cash flow back to the farm that not only pays for your cost to remove the trees, it will pay an additional amount back to the owners of the wood. If we can create this new, it's like creating a new industry in our state. So in addition to growing food and fiber for our country, farmers can become one of the main sources of a renewable fuels in our state, in our country, that can replace fossil fuels, and in the long run add to our energy mix a form of energy that is renewable, clean burning, and readily available every year.
I see. And are there any other state mandates? You mentioned the Clean Air Board or the Air Board. Are there any other state mandates that have been affecting how California farmers are disposing their wood currently? And has Yosemite kind of answered any of those issues that have come up, would you say?
I can't think of another regulatory body that has more power than the Air Board. So the nice thing about our air rules is that we are breathing cleaner air, and so that's what everyone wants. The other thing that we do, and it's not directly related to agriculture down here on the floor of the valley floor, but on the mountain side, we really see ourselves as working hand in glove with the forest communities. We have a great need in our forests to manage them, but it's incredibly expensive to manage our forests. So we actually give value to waste wood that is not valuable for milling, for lumber. We actually give value so that we can help our forest communities again provide an economic engine to their need to thin their forests, especially around the communities where people live, so to reduce the risk of fire.
And is there like a relationship you see between California forests and California agriculture that might not necessarily be touched on or emphasized every day? Are they reliant on each other in any way? Do they need each other to grow, to be healthier? If you could just expand on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all farmers are people, and we love to go and recreate in the mountains. We love the mountains. So we love to see the forests flourish. That's the first thing. As people, we love to see the forests flourish, and we use the forests to relax in. The second thing is, we don't think about it, but everywhere in California, water is an issue. By not managing our forests, we have let our forests become way overpopulated with trees. We were doing, or you were involved as well, but we are doing that forest survey last fall, and we are realizing that there are places in our forests up in the Sierras where the tree count per acre could be 2,500, 3,000 trees per acre or more. And what that does is it just creates a powder keg ready for fire, and not only fires that go along the ground, but fires that ladder up to the tops of the trees, so that crown fires that can destroy whole forests, even the sequoia forests, are not immune to the effects of crown fires. So that's one thing. But when we do thin our forests, we increase the water capacity. First of all, we're increasing how much water is available to every tree we leave. So if we leave old growth trees for the habitat for the species that all the wild species that grow and live up there in the mountains, When we thin that forest, we're leaving less trees, so there's more water per tree, so that in drought years, these trees are now more resilient against the effects of drought. And the effects of drought are dead trees by the beetle up there, the bark beetle. The bark beetle doesn't kill the tree. It's always there. It's when the tree is too dry and can't keep ahead of repairing itself or the damage from the bark beetle that it dies. So managing our trees, give more water per tree so that they become more resilient against cyclical droughts. But in addition to that, we increase our watershed. So the estimation is if we, and I don't have the numbers exactly right, but if we managed our forests properly along the Sierra Nevadas, we would increase our water production that come off of the mountain by 5 to 6 million acre feet. Now, don't quote me on that figure, but it's somewhere in that basis. In other words, we would be producing more water would come off the mountain and into our reservoirs and to be used down in our valley than if we just leave them wild. So we not only increase our fire hazard by not managing our forests, we're actually reducing the water that comes off the mountain for us to manage down here on the valley floor.
I see. And let's say 20 years down the road, how do you see Yosemite Clean Energy supporting California tree fruit and nut farmers? Your own personal opinion.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, to all the farmers out there that have trees, that your wood is valuable, and let us help you find out how to realize that value. Don't give your wood value away. It's like the old mineral right from crude oil. Before oil was used, or there was any real use to oil, it was of no value to the people who own the mineral rights. So they sold their mineral rights. And so many people in this area don't own their mineral rights because the oil companies own the mineral rights. So it's just like wood today. Wood today, everyone thinks is a big liability. It has no value, but in reality, it's the mineral right of the future. So we want farmers to wake up to the fact they have in their hands and under their control the ownership of a mineral right that is of great value for the long term. Two, we want to help you find or discover that value and to develop a system by which the ag industry and the forest communities can take what they have ownership of in the stump, let's just say from stump all the way to the pump. And that's to realize the highest value for that waste wood. We need to take it right down to the consumer level and have it ready at the pump so that we can all participate in the fullest way in this new green energy economy that really agriculture, both forest and the farm, can be at the not only ownership level of, but on a renewal basis, a long-term supplier of green energy that's sustainable. Hydrogen is zero emission. Both of our fuels is negative carbon. In other words, we're 100% reduction in carbon compared to diesel or gasoline. We're right at around a CI zero if we don't do anything with sequestering our carbon dioxide. And so these are renewable fuels. They are the fuels of the future. It's a storable fuel. And as technologies increase, hydrogen will become more storable and stable. Right now, gaseous hydrogen is fine, and we own 4 hydrogen cars. So they're wonderful cars, and they work great. But in the long run, hydrogen will become even more user-friendly and storable. And the ag industry can be part of a solution, not only feeding our nation, but energizing it as well.
Well, thank you, Rob. I really appreciate you coming on here today and really giving a little bit more insight into how Yosemite Clean Energy is providing an answer for agriculture. I know a lot of the time we focused on the forest side of it, but this is obviously a huge aspect. And I just really wanted to thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on here today.
Thanks, Maxine.